8 years ago, when I was 20 years old, my own family threw me out of the house based on my 17-year-old brother's lies. I spent that freezing October night on hard plastic chairs at the Greyhound station, clutching my duffel bag and wondering how the people who raised me could abandon me so completely. Tyler had accused me of stealing our grandfather's prized coin collection, and our parents believed him without asking a single question. What they didn't know was that one tiny security camera would eventually expose the truth in the most devastating way possible. Sometimes justice takes 8 years to arrive, but when it does, it's absolutely beautiful. My name is Mac, and I need to take you back to where this nightmare began. Growing up in our small Ohio town, I was the responsible older brother who worked part-time jobs and saved every penny for community college. Tyler was the charming golden child who could talk his way out of anything. Our parents, David and Sarah, worked hard to provide for us. Dad managed the local auto parts store, and Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school where we both went as kids. The person I was closest to in our family was my grandfather, Eddie Rodriguez. Grandpa Eddie had immigrated from Mexico as a young man, built a successful auto repair business from nothing, and collected rare coins as his hobby. Every weekend I'd drive over to his modest house on Maple Street to help him restore classic cars in his garage. He taught me everything about engines, transmissions, and the satisfaction of fixing something with your own hands. Grandpa Eddie's coin collection was his pride and joy. He had silver dollars from the 1800s walking Liberty half dollars, and mercury dimes that sparkled like jewels when he held them up to the light. He kept them in a locked display case in his living room, and he'd tell me stories about where he found each one. The entire collection was worth about $3,000, which might not sound like much, but to our middle-class family, it represented years of careful saving and hunting. Tyler never showed much interest in Grandpa's coins or cars. He was more focused on his girlfriend Brittany, a spoiled 17-year-old whose father owned the biggest insurance agency in town. Brittany had expensive tastes and expected Tyler to take her to fancy restaurants in the next city over. Tyler worked at the movie theater, but his paychecks barely covered gas money, let alone the lifestyle Brittany demanded. The theft happened during our monthly family dinner at Grandpa Eddie's house. It was the second Sunday in October, and Mom had made her famous pot roast. The whole family was there, including Uncle Frank, Grandpa's younger brother, who worked construction, and our cousin Beth with her 2 young kids. The house felt warm and alive, with conversation kids running around and the smell of coffee brewing. After dinner, while the adults were cleaning dishes and the kids were watching cartoons, Tyler volunteered to help Grandpa organize some boxes in the garage. I thought it was unusual since Tyler normally avoided any kind of work, but I was busy helping Mom wrap leftover food, so I didn't think much of it. Later, Tyler said he was feeling sick and asked Dad to drive him home early. Again, nothing seemed suspicious at the time. The next morning, Grandpa Eddie called our house, his voice shaky with distress. Someone had broken into his display case and stolen his most valuable coins. The lock had been carefully picked, not broken, which meant whoever did it knew what they were looking for. Grandpa was heartbroken, not just about the money, but about losing pieces of history he'd spent decades collecting. Dad immediately drove over to assess the situation, while Mom comforted Grandpa on the phone. When Dad returned, his face was dark with anger. Tyler was sitting at our kitchen table looking pale and nervous. I was upstairs getting ready for my shift at Peterson's Hardware when I heard Tyler's voice rise with what sounded like genuine distress. Tyler told our parents he'd seen me acting strangely at Grandpa's house the night before. He claimed I'd been asking detailed questions about the coin collection and had wandered into the living room alone several times. He said he'd been too scared to mention it earlier because he didn't want to believe his own brother would steal from family. The words came out between convincing sobs, and Tyler's performance was flawless. When Dad called me downstairs, I could see the suspicion already hardening in his eyes. Before I could even process what was happening, Dad demanded to search my room and my car. I was completely bewildered, but figured the search would clear everything up quickly. My confusion turned to horror when Dad found 3 of Grandpa's silver dollars hidden in my toolbox in the garage, wrapped in a shop rag I'd never seen before. I stared at those coins like they were poisonous snakes. I'd never touched Grandpa's collection without permission, and I certainly hadn't stolen anything. But there they were in my toolbox, with my fingerprints on them from when Dad made me pick them up. Tyler watched the whole scene with wide, innocent eyes, occasionally wiping away tears and saying how sorry he was that I'd done this to Grandpa. The confrontation that followed was brutal. Dad's voice shook with rage as he demanded to know why I'd betrayed the man who'd been nothing but kind to me. Mom kept asking me to just tell the truth and return the rest of the coins. They both seemed genuinely hurt and confused about why their responsible son would commit such a heartless crime. Every word I spoke in my own defense sounded hollow and desperate even to my own ears. Tyler sat quietly in the corner playing his role perfectly. He'd occasionally add small details that made his story more believable, like how he'd noticed me looking at the coin case longer than usual, or how I'd seemed nervous when Grandpa showed the collection to Beth's kids. Each detail hammered another nail into my coffin, and I watched my parents' trust in me crumble in real time. The worst part was calling Grandpa Eddie to return the coins Dad had found. Hearing the disappointment in his voice was like having my heart ripped out. This man who'd taught me about integrity and hard work now believed I'd stolen from him. He didn't yell or curse. He just sounded tired and sad, which somehow made it infinitely worse. When I tried to explain that I'd been framed, Grandpa quietly said he'd pray for me to find my way back to the right path. That afternoon, Dad gave me 2 hours to pack my belongings and leave the house. He said I was welcome back when I was ready to admit what I'd done and make full restitution for the missing coins. Mom cried as she watched me pack, but she didn't intervene. Tyler helped carry my bags to the car, whispering fake apologies and promising he'd try to convince our parents to forgive me eventually. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, Tyler stood in the driveway waving goodbye. For just a split second, I caught a glimpse of something cold and calculating in his expression before his mask of concern slipped back into place. In that moment, I realized my little brother had orchestrated the entire thing, but I had no way to prove it. The evidence was stacked against me. My family believed his lies, and I was completely alone. My friend Jake lived in a cramped apartment above the pizza place downtown, and he let me crash on his couch for the first week. Jake had graduated high school with me and was working 2 jobs to pay for trade school. He didn't ask too many questions about why I'd been kicked out, but I could see the doubt in his eyes when I explained the situation. Even my closest friend wasn't completely sure I was telling the truth. Within days, I discovered that Tyler's version of events had spread throughout our small town like wildfire. My boss at Peterson's Hardware, Mr. Peterson, called me into his office and said he couldn't keep someone on staff who stole from family. He'd known my grandfather for 30 years and felt personally betrayed by my supposed actions. The disappointment in his weathered face was crushing as he handed me my final paycheck and asked me to return my store keys. My girlfriend Emma and I had been dating for 8 months, and I thought our relationship was solid enough to weather this crisis. I was wrong. When I showed up at her house to explain what had really happened, her mother, Mrs. Collins, answered the door with ice in her voice. She informed me that Emma didn't want to see me anymore, and that I should stay away from their family. Through the window, I could see Emma watching from the stairs, her face twisted with disgust and betrayal. The girl who'd told me she loved me just 2 weeks earlier now looked at me like I was a dangerous stranger. My college advisor, Dr. Martinez, suggested I consider transferring to a different school when the rumors reached campus. Students who'd been friendly before now avoided eye contact in the hallways. My study group politely disbanded, and professors who'd once encouraged my academic potential now seemed uncomfortable during office hours. The weight of constant judgment was suffocating, making it impossible to focus on classes or maintain any sense of normalcy. The cruelest part was discovering how thoroughly Tyler had poisoned the community against me. He'd told elaborate stories to anyone who would listen about my supposed drug problems and history of stealing. According to Tyler's fiction, I'd been using methamphetamines for months and had stolen money from Mom's purse jewelry from various relatives and tools from neighbors' garages. Each lie built upon the others, creating a comprehensive narrative that painted me as a dangerous addict who'd finally graduated to robbing the man who loved me most. Mrs. Henderson from down the street crossed to the other sidewalk when she saw me coming. The librarian, Miss Foster, who'd helped me with research projects since middle school, now watched me suspiciously whenever I tried to use the computers. Even the elderly man who ran the gas station where I'd bought snacks for years began following me around his store like I might shoplift candy bars. Tyler had systematically destroyed my reputation with surgical precision. Jake's patience ran out after 2 weeks when his landlord threatened eviction for having an unauthorized tenant. I understood completely and started sleeping in my car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that Grandpa Eddie had helped me rebuild the summer before. October nights in Ohio are brutally cold, and I'd wake up with frost covering the inside of my windows, my breath visible in the frigid air. I found a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town, in a neighborhood where nobody knew my name or my supposed crimes. The landlord, Mr. Vasquez, was an older immigrant man who demanded first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit up front. The apartment was basically a studio with a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was mine, and it was shelter, which felt like luxury after sleeping in my car. The only job I could find was working night shifts at a 24-hour gas station called Quick Stop. The owner, Hassan, was a Pakistani immigrant who didn't know about my reputation and was desperate enough for reliable help that he didn't ask too many questions about my references. The pay was minimum wage and the work was mind-numbing, but it kept me fed and housed while I figured out my next move. Working from 11 at night until 7 in the morning meant I rarely saw other people, which was both a blessing and a curse. I avoided the shame of constant judgment, but the isolation was eating away at my sanity. My shift consisted of restocking shelves, cleaning equipment, and serving the occasional trucker or drunk college kid buying energy drinks. The hours crawled by while I replayed the events that had destroyed my life, trying to understand how Tyler had outmaneuvered me so completely. 3 months after being thrown out, I learned that Tyler had been actively working to ensure I could never return home. My cousin Beth called me secretly from work to warn me that Tyler was telling our parents I'd been seen around town looking strung out and desperate. He claimed I'd approached him begging for money and had threatened him when he refused. According to Beth, Tyler was also spreading rumors that I'd been arrested for shoplifting in the next county over, though no such arrest had ever occurred. Tyler's manipulation campaign wasn't limited to maintaining his original lie. He was actively building upon it to make reconciliation impossible. Every few weeks, he'd report a new sighting of me, supposedly doing something criminal or disturbing. He told Dad I'd been harassing Emma's family, causing them to consider getting a restraining order. He informed Mom that several neighbors had seen me driving by our house at odd hours, watching the family like some kind of stalker. The systematic nature of Tyler's deception was becoming clear, but I still had no way to prove his guilt or expose his lies. He'd created an almost perfect crime, using his position as the innocent younger brother, and my supposed guilt to deflect any suspicion from himself. Meanwhile, he was living comfortably at home, probably still dating Brittany, and enjoying the fruits of his theft, while I struggled to survive in exile. The worst part wasn't the physical hardship, or even the loneliness. It was the growing fear that Tyler might actually get away with it forever. In a small town where everyone knows everyone's reputation is everything, and mine was destroyed beyond repair. Even if I somehow proved my innocence years later, would anyone care? Would my family ever forgive themselves for believing such horrible lies about me? The doubt was corrosive, making me question not just Tyler's guilt, but my own memories of what had happened that night. 6 months into my exile, I thought I'd reached the bottom of my personal hell. I was wrong. My cousin Beth called me on a Tuesday evening while I was getting ready for another night shift at the gas station. Her voice was hesitant, like she was afraid to deliver the news she'd uncovered. Beth worked as a receptionist at Hartwell & Associates, the law firm that handled legal matters for several local families, including ours. She'd overheard my parents meeting with Mr. Hartwell about updating their estate planning. What she discovered made my blood run cold with disbelief and rage. Tyler had convinced our parents that I posed an ongoing threat to the family's financial security. He'd painted a picture of me as an unstable addict who might return someday to steal anything valuable I could get my hands on. According to Beth, Tyler had suggested that the family needed legal protection against my potential future crimes. He'd proposed removing me entirely from their will and transferring all assets, including my designated inheritance from Grandpa Eddie, directly to him as the trustworthy son. Our parents had followed Tyler's advice completely. My childhood home, my college fund that Dad had been contributing to for years, and even my future share of Grandpa Eddie's house and belongings had been legally transferred to Tyler's name. In the eyes of the law, I no longer existed as their son. Tyler had successfully erased me from the family, while positioning himself as their protector against my supposed criminality. The legal documents Beth described went even further than simple disinheritance. Tyler had convinced our parents to establish a trust that would prevent me from ever accessing family resources, even if they changed their minds later. The trust was designed to protect Tyler's inheritance from my potential lawsuits or claims creating a permanent legal barrier between me and my birthright. But Tyler's cruelty didn't stop at stealing my inheritance. Beth's investigation revealed something even more sinister that explained why my financial situation had become mysteriously worse over the past few months. Tyler had been using my personal information to open credit cards and loans in my name. He'd obtained my social security number from family documents and used his knowledge of my personal history to answer security questions. The credit cards Tyler opened in my name had been maxed out immediately, with the money going toward expensive purchases I'd never made. He'd bought himself a new truck, high-end electronics, and had even funded a romantic getaway with Brittany to Florida. Meanwhile, the unpaid balances were destroying my credit score and generating collection calls to the phone number Tyler had provided, which happened to be disconnected. When I checked my credit report for the first time in months, the damage was staggering. 7 different credit cards had been opened in my name over the past 6 months, with a total debt of nearly $15,000. There were also 2 personal loans and a line of credit at a furniture store where Tyler had apparently bought a complete bedroom set. Every account was in default, and my credit score had plummeted to the point where I couldn't even qualify for a basic checking account. The identity theft explained why my electricity had been shut off the previous month, despite paying my bill on time. Tyler had opened an account with the electric company in my name at a different address, racked up hundreds of dollars in charges, then failed to pay. When the company tried to collect, they'd frozen all accounts associated with my social security number, including my legitimate service. I spent my next few paychecks on a lawyer consultation to discuss my options for fighting the identity theft. The attorney, Ms. Rodriguez, was sympathetic but realistic about my chances. Proving identity theft by a family member was notoriously difficult, especially when the perpetrator had access to authentic personal information and could claim the accounts were authorized. She warned me that pursuing charges against Tyler could take years and might ultimately be unsuccessful if he claimed I'd given him permission to use my information. Meanwhile, Tyler was living his best life on my stolen money and destroyed credit. Beth told me he'd bought a brand new Ford F-150 truck and was planning an expensive trip to California with his friends for spring break. He'd also upgraded his wardrobe, his phone, and had even purchased expensive jewelry for Brittany. To everyone in town, Tyler appeared to be a hard-working young man who was thriving despite the family trauma caused by his criminal older brother. The psychological toll of watching Tyler prosper from his crimes while I struggled to survive was devastating. Every night at the gas station, I'd stare at the security cameras and wonder if there was any way to expose what he'd done. I'd replay our childhood memories, searching for signs of the calculating monster that had been hiding behind his innocent facade. Had Tyler always been this manipulative, or had something changed when he started dating Brittany and felt pressure to fund her expensive lifestyle? My isolation deepened when I realized I couldn't trust anyone in my old social circle. If Tyler could fool our parents so completely, what was to stop him from manipulating my former friends or classmates? I began to suspect that some of the people who'd turned against me might be innocent victims of Tyler's lies, but I had no way to reach out to them without seeming like the dangerous stalker Tyler had painted me to be. The only person who seemed to maintain any faith in my character was Grandpa Eddie, though even his support was complicated. Beth mentioned that Grandpa had been asking questions about my whereabouts and had expressed concern about my well-being. He'd also made several comments about inconsistencies in Tyler's story that didn't quite add up. But Grandpa was in his 70s, and his health was declining, making it unlikely he could be an effective ally, even if he suspected the truth. As winter turned to spring, I began to accept that Tyler might have committed the perfect crime. He'd stolen thousands of dollars, destroyed my life, secured my inheritance, and positioned himself as the family hero, all while maintaining his reputation as an innocent victim of his brother's criminality. Unless some miracle occurred, Tyler would graduate high school, go to college on the money he'd stolen from me, and live happily ever after while I remained in exile in my own hometown. The only thing keeping me sane was the promise I made to myself every night while restocking candy bars and energy drinks somehow. Someday I would find a way to expose Tyler's lies and reclaim my life. I had no idea how or when that opportunity would come, but I held on to that hope like a lifeline in a storm that seemed like it would never end. After 18 months of exile, I made the difficult decision to leave my hometown entirely. The constant weight of judgment and the impossibility of rebuilding my reputation where everyone knew Tyler's version of events had become unbearable. I loaded my few possessions into my battered Honda and drove 2 hours east to a mid-sized city where I could start over completely. I found work at Martinez Auto Repair, a busy shop owned by Carlos Martinez, a skilled mechanic who'd immigrated from El Salvador 20 years earlier. Carlos didn't care about my past or my credit score. He cared about my ability to diagnose transmission problems and rebuild engines. The skills Grandpa Eddie had taught me in his garage became my salvation, allowing me to earn decent money doing work I actually enjoyed. The other mechanics at the shop, Tony and Derek, accepted me as part of their brotherhood without asking uncomfortable questions about why a 21-year-old was starting over in a new city. We worked together diagnosing complex electrical problems, rebuilding classic muscle cars, and sharing the satisfaction of bringing dead vehicles back to life. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. My new apartment was in a working-class neighborhood where people minded their own business and judged you by your actions rather than rumors from your past. I had neighbors who nodded politely when they saw me, a landlord who cared only about timely rent payments, and local shop owners who treated me like any other customer. The anonymity was liberating after months of feeling like I was under constant surveillance. I began dating Jessica, a nurse at the regional hospital who'd brought her car to our shop for break work. Jessica was kind, intelligent, and refreshingly direct about what she wanted from life. She'd grown up in foster care, so she understood something about starting over and building your own family from scratch. Our relationship developed, slowly built on honest conversations and shared experiences, rather than the superficial attractions of high school romance. Jessica knew I'd had some kind of falling out with my family, but she didn't press for details I wasn't ready to share. She'd simply say that some families were toxic and that choosing your own path took courage. Her acceptance helped me begin to heal from the trauma of Tyler's betrayal, though I still woke up some nights in a cold sweat, reliving the moment I'd found those coins in my toolbox. Just as I was beginning to find peace with my new life, Beth called with devastating news. Grandpa Eddie had suffered a massive heart attack while working in his garage and had been rushed to County General Hospital. The doctors weren't optimistic about his chances of recovery, and the family was gathering to say their goodbyes. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't bear the thought of Grandpa dying without knowing I'd never stopped loving him. I drove back to my hometown that evening, my hands shaking as I navigated the familiar streets I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. The hospital parking lot was full of cars I recognized, including Tyler's expensive truck that he'd bought with my stolen credit. I steeled myself for what would likely be a hostile confrontation with my family, but I needed to see Grandpa one more time. The intensive care unit was crowded with relatives I hadn't spoken to since the night I'd been thrown out. My parents looked older and more tired than I remembered, while Tyler had filled out and carried himself with a new confidence that success and financial security had given him. When I walked into the waiting room, conversation stopped, and the tension became thick enough to cut with a knife. Mom's eyes filled with tears when she saw me, but she didn't approach or acknowledge my presence. Dad's jaw tightened, and he turned away like I was a painful reminder of family shame. Tyler watched me with careful eyes, probably calculating whether my return posed any threat to the narrative he'd constructed about my character and whereabouts. Uncle Frank was the only family member who greeted me warmly, pulling me aside to whisper that Grandpa had been asking about me for months. Frank explained that Grandpa's health had been declining gradually, but he'd remained sharp and curious about why I'd never visited or called. According to Frank, Grandpa had made several comments about wanting to understand what had really happened the night his coins were stolen. I was allowed a few minutes alone with Grandpa while the rest of the family stepped out for coffee. He was unconscious, connected to machines that beeped steadily while monitoring his vital signs. His weathered hands, which had taught me to use every tool in his workshop, were pale and still on the white hospital blanket. I held his hand and whispered apologies for never contacting him, explanations about what had really happened, and promises that I would somehow prove my innocence. Grandpa's eyes opened briefly, and for a moment his gaze focused on my face with startling clarity. His lips moved slightly, and I leaned closer to hear what might be his final words to me. In a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I know the truth. I have proof. The cameras." Then his eyes closed again, and the nurses returned to check his condition. Before I could ask what he meant about cameras and proof, Grandpa's heart monitor showed dangerous irregularities. The medical team rushed in to perform emergency procedures, while the family was moved to another waiting room. 2 hours later, the doctor emerged to inform us that Edward Rodriguez had passed away peacefully at the age of 74. Tyler immediately stepped forward to handle the funeral arrangements, positioning himself as the devoted grandson who would honor Grandpa's memory properly. He spoke eloquently about Grandpa's legacy of hard work and integrity, managing to work in subtle references to how family betrayal had broken Grandpa's heart in his final years. Even at our grandfather's deathbed, Tyler was manipulating the narrative to reinforce his lies about my character. The funeral service was packed with people whose cars Grandpa had fixed, whose lawns he'd mowed when they were sick, and whose problems he'd solved with quiet generosity. Tyler delivered a moving eulogy about the importance of honesty and keeping faith with the people who love you. I sat in the back row watching him perform his grief, while privately celebrating the inheritance he would soon receive through his manipulation of our parents' estate planning. After the burial, the family gathered at Grandpa's house to begin the process of sorting through his belongings. Tyler had already made it clear he planned to claim the house as his primary inheritance, citing conversations where Grandpa had supposedly promised to leave it to him. My parents seemed eager to fulfill what they believed were Grandpa's wishes, especially since Tyler was the only grandchild who'd maintained a relationship with him until his death. Uncle Frank pulled me aside while Tyler was showing off his plans for renovating Grandpa's workshop. Frank whispered that before his death, Grandpa had confided serious doubts about Tyler's version of the coin theft. Grandpa had told Frank there were inconsistencies in Tyler's story that had bothered him for months, and that he'd been conducting his own investigation into what had really happened that night. Frank revealed that Grandpa had recently installed a security system in his house because he suspected someone had been taking small items during family gatherings. The system was connected to his old computer, and Frank believed there might be footage from recent visits that could reveal who was actually stealing from him. The problem was that Frank didn't understand technology and had no idea how to access whatever evidence might exist. As I drove back to my new city that night, Grandpa's whispered words echoed in my mind. He'd known the truth and had proof involving cameras. If that evidence still existed somewhere in his house, it could be the key to exposing Tyler's crimes and reclaiming my life. But with Tyler about to inherit the house and all its contents, I was running out of time to find whatever Grandpa had discovered before it disappeared forever. For the next 2 years, I tried to move forward with my life, while the mystery of Grandpa's final words haunted me. I was promoted to senior mechanic at Martinez Auto Repair, Jessica, and I moved in together, and I even managed to pay off some of the credit card debt Tyler had accumulated in my name. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in Grandpa's house was evidence that could change everything. Tyler had indeed inherited the house and had transformed it into his bachelor pad while finishing his senior year of high school. He'd renovated the workshop into a game room, converted Grandpa's bedroom into a master suite, and had essentially erased all traces of our grandfather's presence. During family gatherings, Tyler played the role of the responsible heir who was honoring Grandpa's memory by maintaining the property. My opportunity for investigation came from an unexpected source. Uncle Frank called me on a Thursday evening in March, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and determination. Frank had been visiting other elderly relatives and had discovered a disturbing pattern that connected directly to Tyler's behavior over the years. Frank's investigation had started when our 82-year-old great-aunt Martha mentioned that several valuable items had gone missing from her house after family visits. Martha lived alone in a tidy ranch house filled with antiques and collectibles she'd inherited from her parents. Over the past 3 years, she'd noticed that jewelry, silver pieces, and small electronic devices had disappeared after holidays and family gatherings. Martha had initially blamed her failing memory, assuming she'd misplaced items or forgotten where she'd stored them. But Frank's careful questioning revealed that the thefts had a clear pattern. Items only went missing after events where Tyler had been present. Martha recalled that Tyler often volunteered to help carry groceries, assist with household chores, or fix minor problems around her house, giving him unsupervised access to her belongings. Frank had also spoken with our cousin Beth, whose husband owned a small construction business. Beth revealed that someone had been stealing tools and materials from job sites where her husband's crew was working. The thefts were sophisticated, targeting expensive power tools and copper wire that could be easily resold. Beth's husband had suspected employees initially, but the pattern suggested someone with inside knowledge of which sites would be unattended and which tools were worth stealing. The connection to Tyler became clear when Frank realized that Beth had been sharing details about her husband's work schedule and job locations during family dinners and phone calls. Tyler had been gathering intelligence about when and where valuable items would be available, then timing his thefts to avoid detection. He'd perfected the art of being helpful and present while systematically robbing his own relatives. Most damning of all, Frank discovered that Tyler had been stealing from our parents' house as well. Mom's jewelry had been disappearing piece by piece, with Tyler taking items sporadically enough that the losses weren't immediately obvious. Dad's collection of vintage fishing reels worth several $1,000s had been slowly depleted over months. Tyler was living under their roof while robbing them blind, just as he'd done to me years earlier. Frank's investigation revealed that Tyler had been operating as a sophisticated thief for at least 5 years, using family gatherings as opportunities to case potential targets and gather information about their valuables and schedules. He'd developed a system for selling stolen goods through online marketplaces and pawn shops in neighboring counties, making the items nearly impossible to trace back to him. The scale of Tyler's criminal enterprise was staggering, but Frank still lacked concrete proof that would convince our parents or law enforcement. Tyler's reputation as the trustworthy son and his careful timing made it nearly impossible to connect him directly to any specific theft. He'd learned to steal items that wouldn't be missed immediately, and to spread his crimes across multiple victims to avoid detection. Frank's most important discovery was that Grandpa Eddie had been conducting his own investigation before his death. According to Frank, Grandpa had confided his growing suspicions about Tyler's involvement in various thefts around the family. Grandpa had been particularly troubled by the fact that Tyler's lifestyle and spending habits didn't match his income from part-time jobs, especially after he'd bought the expensive truck and started taking lavish trips. Frank revealed that Grandpa had installed a sophisticated security system in his house during the final months of his life, including hidden cameras in the living room, kitchen, and workshop. Grandpa had been tech-savvy enough to set up motion-activated recording that would capture anyone moving around his house during family visits. If Tyler had been stealing from Grandpa's house during those final months, there would be video evidence of his crimes. The problem was accessing that evidence before Tyler destroyed it. Tyler had been living in Grandpa's house for over 2 years and had probably discovered the security system by now. Frank wasn't computer literate enough to operate the recording equipment, and hiring a professional investigator would be expensive and might alert Tyler to our suspicions. Frank and I agreed to meet secretly at his house to plan our next move. We needed to find a way to access Grandpa's computer system and recover any video evidence before Tyler realized what we were looking for. Frank still had keys to the house from his days helping Grandpa with maintenance, and he knew Tyler's schedule well enough to predict when the house would be empty. Our plan was risky but necessary. Frank would distract Tyler with a family emergency that required his immediate attention, while I used my mechanical skills to access Grandpa's hidden computer setup. We'd have maybe 2 hours to find and copy any relevant footage before Tyler returned. If we were caught, Tyler would know we suspected him, and he'd have time to destroy evidence and create new lies to explain our behavior. As we finalized our strategy, Frank shared one more crucial piece of information. Tyler had recently gotten engaged to a different girl, Amanda, whose family owned several successful businesses in town. Tyler had been presenting himself as a reformed young man who'd learned from his brother's mistakes and was ready to settle down with someone from a respectable family. He'd been talking about asking our parents for Grandpa's house as a wedding gift, claiming that Grandpa had always wanted to see him married and settled, and Tyler was planning an engagement party at our parents' house with Amanda's wealthy family in attendance, along with most of our extended relatives. It would be the perfect opportunity to expose Tyler's crimes in front of everyone who mattered to him, assuming we could find the proof we needed. Frank and I shook hands on our agreement within the next 2 weeks. We would either clear my name and expose Tyler's lies, or we would lose our last chance for justice forever. Frank and I spent the next week carefully planning our mission to access Grandpa Eddie's computer system. Frank had observed Tyler's routine and identified a window of opportunity on Saturday afternoons when Tyler usually drove to the next town over to visit Amanda's family. We would have approximately 3 hours to search for video evidence before Tyler returned. The night before our planned break-in, Frank called with unexpected news that changed everything. While helping our Aunt Martha organize her attic, Frank had discovered a handwritten note from Grandpa Eddie hidden inside an old photo album. The note was addressed to Frank and dated just 2 weeks before Grandpa's death, suggesting he'd known his health was failing and wanted to leave instructions for someone he trusted. Grandpa's note explained that he'd installed cameras throughout his house because he suspected someone in the family was stealing from him and other relatives. He'd noticed small items disappearing from his workshop and had heard similar complaints from Martha and other elderly family members. The note contained detailed instructions for accessing the computer system hidden in his bedroom closet, including passwords and file locations where the most important footage was stored. Most importantly, Grandpa's note revealed that he'd captured video evidence of Tyler stealing coins from the living room display case during the family dinner 3 years earlier. Grandpa had recognized Tyler in the footage, but had been devastated by the implications of what he'd discovered. According to the note, Grandpa had been planning to confront Tyler privately and give him a chance to confess before involving the authorities or telling our parents. Grandpa's death had prevented that confrontation, but the evidence was still stored on his computer system. Frank and I realized that we not only had proof of Tyler's guilt in the original crime that had destroyed my life, but we also had evidence of his ongoing criminal behavior that could finally expose the full scope of his deception. Armed with Grandpa's instructions, we executed our plan the following Saturday. Frank created a distraction by calling Tyler with news that our cousin Beth had been in a car accident and needed immediate help at the hospital across town. Tyler, maintaining his image as a caring family member, immediately drove off to assist with the emergency that existed only in Frank's imagination. I used Grandpa's spare key to enter the house, while Frank stood watch from his truck parked down the street. The house felt different without Grandpa's presence, sterile and impersonal, in a way that reflected Tyler's lack of connection to family history. I found the hidden computer setup exactly where Grandpa's note had indicated, concealed behind a false panel in the bedroom closet. The computer system was more sophisticated than I'd expected, with multiple hard drives and a network of cameras that covered every room in the house. Grandpa had been thorough in his surveillance, creating a comprehensive record of everyone who'd visited his home during the final year of his life. I followed his written instructions to access the specific files that contained footage from the night of the coin theft. Watching the security video was like experiencing a nightmare in reverse. The crystal-clear footage showed Tyler carefully examining Grandpa's coin display while the rest of the family was busy in the kitchen. Tyler looked around to make sure he wasn't being observed, then used a small tool to pick the lock on the display case with practiced ease. He selected specific valuable coins with the knowledge of someone who'd studied the collection carefully, then re-locked the case to hide evidence of the theft. The most damning part of the video showed Tyler planting the stolen coins in my toolbox in Grandpa's garage. He'd clearly planned the frame job in advance, bringing a shop rag to wrap the coins and knowing exactly where my tools were stored. The footage captured Tyler's face clearly as he hid the evidence that would destroy my life, and his expression showed no remorse or hesitation about betraying his own brother. I copied the relevant video files to a flash drive while also downloading footage from more recent family gatherings. The additional evidence showed Tyler stealing various items from Grandpa's house over the months before his death, including tools, electronics, and cash that Grandpa kept in a kitchen drawer for emergencies. Tyler had been systematically robbing our dying grandfather while playing the role of the devoted grandson who visited regularly to check on his welfare. Frank called to warn me that Tyler was heading back to the house earlier than expected, having discovered that Beth wasn't actually at the hospital. I quickly secured the computer system and erased any traces of my presence before slipping out through the back door. Frank picked me up 2 blocks away, and we drove to his house to review the evidence we'd recovered. The video footage was devastating proof of Tyler's guilt, but Frank and I realized we needed to be strategic about how we revealed it. Simply confronting Tyler privately would give him an opportunity to destroy additional evidence and create new lies to explain the situation. We needed to expose him publicly in a way that would make denial impossible and ensure that everyone who'd believed his lies would see the truth simultaneously. Our opportunity came sooner than expected. Tyler announced that he and Amanda were planning an engagement party for the following weekend to be held at our parents' house, with both families in attendance. Tyler had been telling Amanda's parents about his close relationship with his grandfather and how he'd inherited the family home as recognition of his good character. He planned to ask our parents publicly for official ownership of Grandpa's house as an engagement gift, presenting it as a continuation of family tradition. Frank and I realized this was perfect timing for our revelation. Tyler would be surrounded by everyone whose opinion mattered to him, including his fiance's family, who knew nothing about his criminal history. He'd be celebrating his success and probably feeling confident enough to make jokes about how easily he'd fooled everyone for years. The psychological impact of being exposed at his moment of triumph would be devastating and ensure maximum consequences for his actions. I spent the week preparing for the confrontation by organizing the video evidence into a clear timeline and making multiple copies to prevent Tyler from destroying the proof. Frank arranged to bring a laptop and projector to the engagement party under the pretense of showing family photos and videos in honor of the celebration. We planned our revelation carefully, timing it for maximum emotional impact when Tyler would be most vulnerable to exposure. The irony of using Tyler's own engagement party to expose his lies felt like poetic justice. He'd built his new relationship on the foundation of his supposed good character and family values, presenting himself as the responsible son who'd learned from his brother's mistakes. Amanda and her family had no idea they were celebrating the engagement of a calculated thief who destroyed his own brother's life to cover up his crimes. As the party approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness about finally confronting the person who'd stolen 3 years of my life. Tyler had no idea that his victims had been gathering evidence against him, or that his grandfather's love for truth had reached beyond the grave to ensure justice would eventually be served. The security footage Grandpa had captured would speak louder than any words revealing Tyler's true character to everyone who'd been deceived by his innocent facade. The engagement party was held on a perfect Saturday afternoon in late spring, with our parents' backyard decorated with white streamers and tables covered in Mom's best linens. Amanda's family had arrived early, dressed in expensive clothes that reflected their social status in the community. Her father, Mr. Williams, owned 3 successful restaurants, and her mother, Patricia, served on the hospital board and several charitable organizations. They clearly saw Tyler as a worthy match for their accomplished daughter. Tyler was in his element, playing the role of the reformed young man who'd overcome family tragedy to build a successful life. He wore a new suit and moved through the crowd with confidence, introducing Amanda to relatives and telling carefully edited stories about his childhood and relationship with Grandpa Eddie. I watched from Frank's truck parked across the street, waiting for the right moment to make my entrance. The guest list included everyone who'd believed Tyler's lies about me over the years, our parents' extended family, several neighbors, and even some of my former classmates who'd turned against me when the rumors spread. Tyler had invited them all to witness his triumph, never imagining that his moment of glory would become his public destruction. Amanda was a genuinely nice girl who clearly believed she was marrying an honest man with strong family values. She spoke lovingly about how Tyler had told her stories about learning life lessons from his grandfather and how he'd been devastated by his older brother's betrayal of the family trust. Watching her defend Tyler's character while describing my supposed crimes was heartbreaking, knowing she was an innocent victim of his manipulation. Frank arrived with the laptop and projector, telling my parents he wanted to show family photos and videos in honor of Tyler and Grandpa Eddie's close relationship. Tyler was delighted by the idea, probably expecting a slideshow that would reinforce his image as the devoted grandson. He helped Frank set up the equipment on the back patio, joking about how Grandpa would have loved to see him getting married to such a wonderful girl. The party was in full swing when I finally approached the backyard gate. The conversation stopped abruptly when people recognized me, and the tension became thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents looked shocked and uncomfortable, probably wondering why I'd chosen to appear uninvited at such an important family celebration. Tyler's face went pale for just a moment, before his practiced mask of concern slipped back into place. Tyler immediately played his role perfectly, expressing surprise and cautious welcome at my unexpected appearance. He told the gathered crowd that he'd always hoped his older brother would eventually get the help he needed and rejoin the family. His performance was flawless, presenting himself as the forgiving victim who was willing to give his troubled brother another chance, despite years of pain and disappointment. I walked calmly to where Frank was waiting with the laptop, ignoring the whispered conversations and suspicious stares from guests who remembered the stories they'd heard about my supposed crimes. Amanda looked confused, but hopeful, probably thinking she was about to witness a heartwarming family reconciliation. Tyler positioned himself near his fiancée, ready to play the compassionate brother who was bigger than his past hurts. Frank addressed the crowd, explaining that he wanted to share some special memories of Grandpa Eddie before the official toasts began. He talked about how much Grandpa had valued truth and justice, and how he'd always taught the family that secrets had a way of coming to light eventually. Tyler nodded along, probably planning to use Frank's speech as an opportunity to reinforce his image as Grandpa's spiritual heir. The first video Frank played was innocent footage of a recent family gathering, showing everyone laughing and enjoying themselves around Grandpa's dining room table. Tyler relaxed visibly, assuming the presentation would be a harmless trip down memory lane. He even made a few comments about how much he missed those special times with his grandfather, earning sympathetic nods from Amanda's parents. Tyler's confidence was at its peak when he decided to entertain the crowd with stories about the family's past troubles. He spoke eloquently about forgiveness and second chances, then made a casual joke about how easy it had been to convince everyone that I'd stolen Grandpa's coins. He laughed about my desperate denials and how pathetic I'd looked trying to prove my innocence. The crowd was uncomfortable with his callousness, but they still believed his version of events. Tyler was in the middle of describing my supposed guilt when Frank quietly switched to the security footage from 3 years earlier. The video began playing on the large screen Frank had set up, showing a clear view of Grandpa's living room during the family dinner when the coins were stolen. Tyler was still talking, unaware that behind him, the truth was being revealed to everyone present. The crowd gradually fell silent as they realized what they were watching. The footage clearly showed Tyler examining the coin collection, picking the lock on the display case, and carefully selecting valuable pieces to steal. His face was visible throughout the theft, and his movements showed the practiced ease of someone who'd planned the crime in advance. There was no question about what was happening or who was responsible. Tyler finally noticed the silence and turned to see what had captured everyone's attention. His face went white with horror as he watched himself committing the crime he'd blamed on me for 3 years. The video continued to play, showing Tyler planting the stolen coins in my toolbox with calculated precision, destroying my life to protect himself from consequences. Amanda gasped and stepped away from Tyler, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Her parents looked disgusted and betrayed, realizing they'd been completely deceived about their future son-in-law's character. My parents stared at the screen in devastating recognition, understanding they'd thrown out their innocent son based on elaborate lies told by their guilty one. Frank let the video play through completely, then switched to footage of Tyler's more recent thefts from Grandpa's house during his final months. The additional evidence showed Tyler stealing tools, electronics, and cash, while playing the role of the caring grandson who visited regularly to help with household chores. The pattern of manipulation and theft was undeniable, captured in crystal clear detail by the security system Tyler never knew existed. Tyler tried desperately to explain the footage, claiming it had been doctored or taken out of context, but his protests sounded hollow and unconvincing. The evidence was too clear and comprehensive to dismiss, and his earlier jokes about framing me had revealed his true character to everyone present. Amanda removed her engagement ring and placed it on the table before walking away without saying a word. The confrontation that followed was swift and decisive. Mr. Williams told Tyler he never wanted to see him near his family again, and several other guests expressed their disgust at being deceived for so long. My parents approached me with tears in their eyes, begging for forgiveness and trying to understand how they'd been so completely fooled by their younger son's lies. Tyler's reputation in town was destroyed instantly and completely. Within hours, news of his exposure had spread throughout the community, reaching everyone who'd believed his stories about my supposed crimes. The local police were contacted about the theft and identity fraud, and Tyler found himself facing serious criminal charges for the first time in his life. The legal consequences for Tyler were severe and swift. The video evidence made prosecution straightforward, and his pattern of theft from multiple family members demonstrated a criminal enterprise rather than isolated incidents. He was convicted on multiple counts of theft fraud and identity theft, resulting in a 3-year prison sentence and orders to make full restitution to his victims. My parents spent months making amends for their mistake, restoring my inheritance, and helping me repair the credit damage Tyler had caused. They also paid for family counseling sessions, where we slowly rebuilt trust and communication that had been shattered by Tyler's lies. The process was difficult and emotional, but it ultimately brought us closer together than we'd been before the crisis. I returned to my hometown and opened my own auto repair business using the skills Grandpa Eddie had taught me to build something positive from the wreckage of my past. Jessica moved with me, and we eventually married in a small ceremony held in Grandpa's backyard, now restored as a memorial garden in his honor. Many of the same people who'd shunned me years earlier became loyal customers who respected the integrity I'd maintained through my ordeal. The most satisfying outcome was learning that Grandpa Eddie had known the truth all along. His security system hadn't just captured evidence of Tyler's crimes, it had been his way of ensuring justice would eventually be served, even if he wasn't alive to see it. In his final months, Grandpa had been gathering proof and leaving instructions for Frank and me to find, knowing that truth has a way of surfacing when good people refuse to give up. Tyler was released from prison after serving 2 years of his sentence, but he never returned to our hometown. The scandal had made it impossible for him to rebuild his reputation locally, and he moved to a different state to start over with whatever lessons he'd learned from his experience. I never heard from him again, which was exactly how I preferred it. 8 years after that terrible October night when I was thrown out of my family's house, I finally understood that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important discoveries about character resilience and the power of truth. Tyler's attempt to destroy my life had ultimately made me stronger and more determined to live with integrity, even when the world seemed stacked against me. The security footage that exposed Tyler's lies became a local legend, reminding everyone in our small town that technology and truth are powerful allies when fighting injustice. Grandpa Eddie's love for his family had reached beyond death to ensure that good would triumph over evil, proving that some bonds are stronger than lies, theft, or even time itself. Looking back on those dark years of exile and struggle, I'm grateful for the hard lessons I learned about perseverance, self-reliance, and the importance of maintaining faith in eventual justice. Tyler's betrayal taught me that family isn't just about blood relationships. It's about the people who stand by you when the truth matters more than convenience or comfort. Today, I run a successful business in the town where I was born, surrounded by people who respect the character I've built through years of honest work and principled living. Jessica and I have 2 young children who will grow up hearing stories about their great-grandfather's wisdom and integrity, ensuring that Grandpa Eddie's values continue to influence future generations. Sometimes I drive past the house where Tyler used to live, now occupied by a different family who has no idea about the drama that once unfolded within its walls. The workshop where Grandpa taught me about engines and life has been restored to its original purpose, where I now teach my own children the same lessons about craftsmanship, honesty, and the satisfaction that comes from fixing things that are broken. The coin collection that started this whole nightmare was recovered from the pawn shops where Tyler had sold it, and it now sits in a place of honor in my living room. Every piece tells a story about persistence and the belief that truth will always find a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried by lies and manipulation. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone close to you betrayed your trust so completely that it changed your entire perspective on family and loyalty? Sometimes the people we love most are capable of the deepest deceptions. But I've learned that maintaining your integrity through those trials is what ultimately defines your character. I'd love to hear your thoughts about forgiveness, family dynamics, and how you've handled betrayal in your own life. Please like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity. Share this with someone who might need to hear about the power of persistence, and leave a comment below about your own experiences with family challenges and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter how dark things seem, truth and justice have a way of finding the light. Stay strong, keep fighting for what's right, and never give up hope that things can get better.